Imagine a solitary farmer, hardened by years of loss and silence, whose life was meticulously planned around survival. His quiet world was shattered during a fateful trip to town, where he encountered the last Apache woman, chained and defiant, at an auction. What could compel a man who sought only solitude to purchase such a stranger? Before we unveil the incredible saga of Reed Holston and Awanada, don't forget to like this video and tell us where you're watching from. Reed Holston guided his tired mule team down the main stretch of Redstone Crossing with the same slow steadiness he used for every arduous job that kept his struggling ranch from collapsing. His rugged coat was thoroughly dusted, mirroring the color of the road beneath them. His beard, unkempt and in dire need of attention, hadn't seen a razor in weeks, a testament to his isolated existence. His eyes, washed out to a weary gray by years of relentless sun and constant squinting, moved over storefronts, the scattered men, and the tethered horses without any inclination to linger. He wasn't in town for idle gossip or social pleasantries. He came for essential provisions: a sack of salt, a tin of precious coffee, lamp oil, a box of nails, and a new whetstone because the old one, a faithful companion for countless tasks, had cracked clean through. He told himself firmly that this was all. In and out, no delays, no unnecessary interactions. The last time he had lingered in town past sundown, some loose-tongued drunk had, with a few too many drinks in him, dredged up the bitter memories of the war, the dead, and the painful part Reed had played as a Union scout. Reed, a man of few words even on a good day, had stopped talking altogether, his jaw tight, and simply left. There was nothing to say, nothing that could alter the grim reality of those days. His wife, the quiet anchor of his life, had been dead. For 10 long years, her resting place a simple hill behind their cabin, marked by a plain wooden cross and a stone he had turned over with his own calloused hands. The ranch itself felt half alive, sometimes even less, a constant battle against the elements and dwindling resources. But it was still standing. That, he often reminded himself, was his singular mission now: to keep it standing, to keep the fence rails diligently mended, to keep himself fed, and to keep the days moving in a straight, unwavering line. He would have gone straight to the general store, bypassing all distractions, if not for the unusual raucous noise emanating from the old liver yard. A cluster of men had gathered close, some letting out loud, boisterous laughs, others spitting carelessly onto the dry earth. Some stood with that empty, almost cruel attention that settled upon people when there was nothing productive to occupy their time, and mere cruelty became a twisted form of entertainment. Reed didn't intentionally slow his pace. He slowed because the path narrowed abruptly, choked with bodies, and because, above the din, he distinctly heard the word auction, followed by last one left, and then, chillingly, worthless. His hands, usually steady, tightened just a touch on the reins before he instinctually set the brake and stepped down from his wagon. He saw her at once. She was chained to a rough-hewn post, her wrists already red and visibly bruised from the unforgiving iron. Yet she stood upright, a posture of quiet defiance, not stiff with fear, nor slumped in resignation, but simply upright. Her chin was held level, a subtle declaration of unbroken spirit. Her eyes, startlingly clear, were focused on nothing immediately. In front of her, as if she had long since learned it was safer to look through men, to gaze past their faces, rather than to meet their cruel, judging stares directly. Her dress, made of deerskin with fringe that had once been meticulously placed, was torn in several places. Beads and feathers, remnants of a more dignified past, still clung to some spots, but the neckline had been ripped down so far it exposed the top curve of her chest and the subtle curve of her cleavage. There was no attempt to cover it, not out of brazenness, but because there was no extra cloth to be found, and because, she must have known, modesty had offered her no protection from anything. Her skin held the rich, sun-warmed color of the country she hailed from, a beautiful copper. The lean, defined muscles along her bare arms and calves spoke volumes of a life steeped in hard work, long walks, and an unyielding refusal to break under pressure. She appeared young, perhaps no older than 24. Her hair was a cascade of black, long and tangled, parts of it still braided, other sections pulled loose by days of wind and rough handling. Men had clearly been jeering at her. Reed could discern that from the cruel set of their mouths and the carelessly invasive way they leaned in, invading her personal space. But she hadn't reacted. She hadn't given them the satisfaction of a response, not a single flinch or tear. "She ain't spoke a word," a man standing uncomfortably close to Reed muttered, not looking at him directly, but announcing the fact to anyone within earshot. 3 days. Others sold quick. Not her. Wouldn't kneel. Wouldn't cry. Just stands there. Eh. He spat onto the ground, a gesture of contempt. "Folks say she's cursed or stubborn, or both." Reed's jaw worked once, a slight clench, but he offered no reply. He simply stepped closer, his worn boots sinking a fraction into the dry, unforgiving soil. Finally, the woman's eyes shifted, their steady gaze landing on him. There was no plea there, no flicker of desperate hope, no hint of friendliness, and certainly no relief. Just a quick, precise reading of him, the way a person checks for a potential threat and instinctively decides on the next course of action. He knew that look. He had worn it himself after the war, a constant vigil against unseen dangers. He still wore it some mornings when he woke, disoriented, and had to forcibly remind himself there was nothing chasing him anymore, nothing but the persistent ghosts of memory. He knew with a certainty that settled heavy in his gut that he could leave. He could buy his nails and coffee, turn his wagon around, and go home. He could pretend he hadn't seen her, hadn't witnessed her silent suffering. He could mend fence, rails, oil his lantern, and sit by the fire thinking about nothing in particular until Sunday, when he would walk up to his wife's grave and tell her that, indeed, nothing had changed. But he also knew this, with an equally potent certainty. If he left, she would still be there when the sun dipped below the horizon. And by then, some other man, one with less patience, less restraint, and coins jingling in his pocket, would have ideas swirling in his head. The outcome, in that scenario, would be grimly, unequivocally certain. Reed reached inside his coat, his fingers finding the familiar wad of folded bills and a few coins he had meticulously counted twice that morning. He stepped toward the man, who seemed to be handling the grim trade, a burly figure with a coarse laugh. "How much?" Reed asked, his voice low and a little raspy from disuse. The man blinked, clearly surprised both that Reed had spoken at all, and that anyone, let alone this silent farmer, would express an interest. He named a number, a sum that was less than what Reed held in his hand, but undeniably more than the woman was worth to him after 3 frustrating days of not selling. Reed didn't haggle, didn't argue. He simply placed the money without another word into the man's waiting palm. The man shrugged, a gesture of satisfaction, content with receiving something for what he considered nothing, and bent to unlock the heavy chains binding her wrists. "You want a bill of sale?" the man asked, an edge of sarcasm in his voice. "No," Reed stated flatly. The chains fell, clattering softly against the dry earth. The oppressive weight lifted from her wrists, but she didn't rub them, didn't make a show of her newfound physical freedom. She didn't move an inch until Reed turned away, signaling his departure. Then, and only then, did she step forward. Staying there was no longer safer than following him. Every choice left to her was a bad one, she knew, but some, she instinctively understood, were demonstrably worse. Reed didn't touch her. He didn't guide her with a hand or a word. He didn't say anything at all. He simply walked back to his wagon, a slow, deliberate pace, and climbed up onto the driver's seat. She climbed in after him, a silent, graceful movement, and sat on the plank seat, her hands resting calmly in her lap, her shoulders held steady. She glanced at the coat he wore, a brief, assessing look, then away. He noticed the biting cold that was already beginning to drift in from the north, and the utter inadequacy of her torn dress against it. He slowly took off his own coat, a heavy wool-lined garment, and held it out toward her. She stared at it, then at him, her gaze unwavering, and finally, after a measured pause, she took it. But she didn't put it on. She just held it carefully over her legs, a small private shield. They left Redstone Crossing with the fading sounds of boots and careless laughter trailing behind them. No one followed. No one seemed to care. The mule team moved at a slow, steady rhythm on the dusty road, a pace Reed knew by heart. Neither of them uttered a single word for miles. Reed's mind, ever practical, kept circling back to the pressing realities of his land. What urgently needed repairing, how much feed was left for the animals, the broken hinge on the chicken coop door, the ominous feeling that winter would close in fast this year if the sky stayed the way it was. He glanced once at her wrists. The skin was raw, angry. He watched her glance toward the distant horizon, then down at her hands, her face remaining utterly still, a mask of carefully cultivated impassivity. He wondered, with a flicker of understanding, how long she had been moving through the world, meticulously keeping her face still, hiding every emotion. Her name, he would learn much later, was Awanada. She had been brutally taken in a raid, dragged through endless miles of scrubland and jagged rock, stripped not only of her freedom but of her very language by men who laughed when she couldn't answer their cruel questions. And she had been left unsold for 3 days, because pride, her quiet, fierce pride, does not bend or move itself for the sake of anyone's comfort. Her mission now, if such a heavy word could even fit the circumstances, was to stay alive without relinquishing the last vestiges of what made her feel like herself. She would not kneel. She would not beg. She would not utter pleas to men who had none to offer her. Survival without bending. That was the thin yet unbroken line etched in her mind. Reed's mission, for years, had been simple, almost stark. Keep the ranch breathing. Keep himself useful enough to justify another day. Keep his dead wife remembered without allowing the grave to swallow the rest of his remaining years. Buying her, this defiant, silent woman, had certainly not been part of that carefully constructed plan. He wasn't entirely sure what it meant now that he had. But he knew, with a deep-seated certainty, that he hadn't brought her home to own her. He knew, too, that the cabin had room for another bed. And he knew, with a weariness that had settled deep in his bones, that the crushing silence in that place had grown far too heavy to carry much longer. Dusk laid a flat, orange light over his land when they finally arrived. The fence line leaned precariously. The pasture grass was thin and brittle. The barn door stuck with infuriating regularity if he didn't lift it just right. He pulled the wagon to a halt near the well, climbed down, and moved with practiced movements. She waited, watching his hands, studying what he did and how he moved, an observer of intent. He offered a hand to help her down, a simple gesture of courtesy. She looked at it, her gaze assessing but didn't take it. She stepped down on her own, her bare feet meeting the packed dirt. A flash of pain, fleeting but sharp, crossed her eyes when the rough ground bit at the raw spots on her soles. And then it was gone again, her face a mask once more. He opened the cabin door and stepped aside, allowing her to go first so she could survey the small, confined space before he moved into it, respecting her need to assess her new surroundings. The cabin was essentially one room, with a short wall built halfway across it, a suggestion of separation rather than a true division. Inside, there was a wood stove that desperately needed a new seal, a table he had built himself with legs that were perpetually uneven, and 2 beds, his a larger, sturdy frame, and a smaller one he had painstakingly made when his wife had fallen ill and could no longer climb in and out of the higher frame. He gestured toward that smaller bed. "Yours," he said, his voice quiet, "if you want it." He didn't say anything about the door staying unlocked or locked, didn't issue commands about chores, or specify where she could and couldn't go. He didn't draw arbitrary rules because he didn't yet know what she truly needed. And he wasn't going to pretend that a hastily made purchase gave him the inherent right to decide it all for her. She stood perfectly still, taking everything in. The stove, the bed, the small, sparse shelf against the far wall with a folded shirt and a basin on it, the single window with its nailed-down shutter, the pervasive smell of wood smoke and lamp oil, and the faint, almost ghostly trace of a woman's soap that still clung to the few things Reed hadn't managed to throw away. Her eyes, in their quiet survey, stopped for a second on a simple ring that lay on the table, not worn, just kept, a tangible echo of the past. Reed followed her gaze, then looked away, a flicker of something unreadable in his own eyes. He slid the ring into his pocket without comment. "I'll make food," he said, breaking the heavy silence. "You can wash. Basin's there. Water's clean." He ladled thick stew, rich with beans and the last of the summer squash, into 2 tin bowls. He set one bowl near her bed, a silent invitation, and the other on the table for himself. He didn't sit directly across from her. He gave her the vital space to decide where she would eat. She chose the floor by the fire, settling cross-legged, the heavy coat draped carefully across her lap, her eyes fixed on the mesmerizing flames. He sat at the table, his movements deliberate. The room, now holding 2 people, was steeped in a silence that wasn't hostile, but heavy, weighted with new facts and the unspoken complexities of their shared, uncertain future. Reed ate slowly, mindfully, listening to the quiet, almost imperceptible scrape of her spoon against the tin. He thought about the next morning. Animals to feed, fences to check, wood to split, the endless cycle of ranch life. He considered whether she would want to help, or if she would prefer to be Reed, and Awanada's journey stands as a powerful testament to the human spirit's profound capacity for connection and renewal. It proves that a home is more than just a physical place. It's a bond forged in shared silence, mutual respect, and the courage to build a future even when the past dictates otherwise. Their saga challenges us all to look beyond societal labels and embrace the unexpected paths to belonging. What does their incredible resilience mean to you? Let us know your thoughts in the comments, and be sure to subscribe for more untold stories of the Wild West.